Well, good morning or good afternoon. How many people are here from Alaska? Raise your hand. That's great. Reggie, it's good to see you. Alice and Neil, it's good to see you. Alice and Mr. President, thank you for pulling this off. The Arctic Circle has been a long time coming, and it's a spectacular gathering, and delighted to be here. We're meeting on what the United States celebrates tomorrow is Columbus Day. And of course, I heard you speak at one point in New York, Mr. President, about Iceland actually having discovered America. And so let's note that also today. The colony in Greenland didn't last as long as it did once the Alaskans came from the west to be there, but you're sitting next to your Russian colleague, and it's also a good time to recognize the fact that this neighborhood has been coming together for some time. The last time the government was about to shut down, the Washington Post did a story, tongue-in-cheek, suggesting that maybe Alaska be sold back to Russia or some other place to help the United States balance its budget. And I was quoted as saying, well, if you, the United States, are selling, we want to be bidding. In Alaska, if we were to institute currency, our currency would be backed by gold, by oil and gas, by strategic minerals, by fur-bearing critters, by strategic flyover rights, by tremendous views, by huge fisheries resources, and of course our latest export, reality TV shows. But the question really does come up, and we are coming up on the 150th anniversary of the Alaska Purchase, and it's an argument that Alaskans have quite a bit, which is, are we worth it? It was said at the time that it was Seward's folly. It was said at the time of the Alaska transfer that the Russians had taken everything out of it that there was to got out of it. A New York newspaper said that Alaska was a sucked orange. But our deal really is to educate the world to the opportunities of Alaska without sounding like we want to tear the place up. And so what I wanted to touch on very briefly, Scott, was some of the highlights in our current development agenda, some of the highlights in our current environment agenda, and some of the highlights in our current political agenda. On the side of development, I guess I would bring it down to our agenda is to try to be competitive in attracting investment around the world. And you heard from Scott Minard this morning about the challenges of finding investable vehicles in the Arctic. And we've worked very, very hard to change our tax policy to make us an investable place for our oil and gas. But I will also say that for all kinds of resources in the state, we're really in a battle for access. And I like to say there's 5 different kinds of access. There's legal access, which is sometimes the question, and we heard it with Law of the Sea, of who owns what before you can invest. There's physical access, which is sometimes getting roads or ports, and there's been a lot of discussion about ports. There's intellectual access, and you have Fran Omer here and others with the U.S. Arctic Research Commission, and frankly, until you know what you have, until you know what kind of resources to protect. And I was glad to hear Dr. Chilingaroff talk about the needs for a continued polar decade of research. That's very important. But that's usually what we ask our central governments for in terms of legal, physical, and intellectual access. But we still know in our state that we have to work on labor access, capital access, and market access. And so our development agenda, in very general terms, is headed toward access. Our environmental agenda is that we want to develop and live in the Arctic and enjoy the environment as it is, but the ugliest environment is one where people don't have jobs, do not have the health that the jobs and the revenues bring, do not have the means to manage fisheries sustainably or wildlife sustainably. And I can tell you that coming from a state where 90% of our revenues are from oil, where it's actually a challenge to do the things that we have to do for the environment when revenues are declining. But two issues in the environment that we are working on quite intently right now that I wanted to highlight. One is the issue of safe shipping. And I think it's been said here this morning in a couple of different places, but if you happen to be, say, a large company like Shell drilling for oil offshore in Alaska, you're subject to very strong environmental regulation and very strong preparation for oil spills is a requirement. On the other hand, the number of ships now coming through the Bering Strait from other parts of the Arctic and linking parts of Asia and Europe is growing very quickly, and the amount of regulation or basic regulation that is there is very minimal. And I like to put it this way, the man who'll follow me is mayor of an area just next to the Bering Strait. I want him, if there is an accident, not to have to meet the people who would be responding to the accident the first time at 2 in the morning. We need to be prepared now as communities working, and that's our objectives before the International Maritime Organization. That's our hope with the Arctic Council effort going on oil spill prevention, and frankly, that's our hope with the proposal the United States has made for a Bering Strait vessel traffic system with the Russians that we might later take to the IMO. So that's an important environmental objective. A second environmental objective relates to the first because the importance of the safe shipping comes from food security. And one of the most important foods in Alaska that we produce is our fisheries. And there again, we're looking for better cooperation with our partners in the Bering Sea area, our partners in the North Pacific, and frankly, our partners in the Arctic to make sure that we have sustainable fisheries. And I'm very glad that the last set of consultations between the United States and Russia on fisheries science produced a new openness and a new general commitment to share our science more intently. There are people who live on the Kuskokwim River, the Yukon River, even the Kenai River who are not seeing the kind of fish return that we've had before. We're working very hard with our offshore fisheries to limit and regulate bycatch and look forward to stronger international partnerships in that area as well. The third area I thought I would touch on is just our political agenda. And I think it's important to realize that in the last 50 years, we've seen a lot more in the way of self-determination in the Arctic, and there's a lot more to be found. When Greenland has the opportunity to find independence as a country, we're standing in a country which was once part of Denmark and became an independent country relatively recently. If you see what's happened in the Yukon, where it's the fastest growing jurisdiction in Canada, and that may be in part because they received capability to govern all of their national lands. You see that effort happening in the Northwest Territories and later in Nunavut. Alaska, which gained 103 million acres at statehood, is still looking for a little bit better joint decision-making capability on the lands that it has within the state. As Senator Murkowski mentioned, we saw a proposal to move more national forests into state hands, and we saw that happen in several other states. We're working to bring decision-making home many ways in the tradition that we have with the Alaska Native Land Claims Settlement, with the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which brought much more fisheries management home, and that is a continued political agenda on behalf of Alaskans. Last, and before I sit down, I just say that there are opportunities in the Canadian chairmanship of the Arctic Council to see some great improvements in oil spill prevention and response. I'd say outside the Arctic Council process, and Alice, this is something that we had talked about before this conference, we look very, I think the success and the track record in the Barents region between the Scandinavian countries and Russia is something that would be wonderful to replicate in the Bering region between the United States, Canada, and Russia in terms of the level of cooperation at all levels of government that we don't yet see. We are looking for, and I appreciated Dr. Chelingarov's remarks about research. One concern that I have, and I believe this was behind a little bit Fran Ulmer's question, is that with the claims under Law of the Sea, there may be actually less access to research in the Arctic Ocean unless we deal with it, and that's why I'm very glad that the Arctic Council is dealing with this issue right now. We look forward to the progress of the Business Forum, because for all of us to meet our sustainable development objectives, we're going to have to raise investment, and the Business Forum can help us on that. And finally, in terms of joint efforts on shipping safety, there's not only legal efforts that need to be done, as I've talked about with the vessel traffic system, but also tremendous opportunities for joint investment and cooperation. And with that, I'll sit down. Thank you.